Hello class, this is a short video on how to find the least common denominator when you're dealing with rational expressions or rational equations. Now you know that in order to add or subtract rational expressions or solve rational equations, you must find the least common denominator. Sometimes we call that the least common multiple. So let's use this example to find out how to do that. First, we're going to factor the denominators. That's easy enough. And then we're going to look at each factor and note how many times it appears in each denominator or each factorization. Now, in the first expression, x minus 4 appears once in the denominator, and so does x plus 4. They both appear just once. In the second expression, x plus 4 appears once. Now, we're going to pick the factors that are used the maximum number of times in any one denominator. Both of ours are used just once. And so, in fact, our LCD is x minus 4 and x plus 4. Because they were both used only once. Let's go to the second example. Now, our first step is to factor the denominators. So, the first expression factors like this, and the second and third expressions were already fully factored. Now, I'm going to look at each factor. Now, x minus 3 and x plus 2 appear once each in the first denominator. The factor of x appears once in the second denominator, and the factor of x plus 1 appears once. Since each factor appears once, we need each of these factors to be in our LCD. So we're going to build our LCD, and it will look like x times x minus 3 times x plus 1 times x plus 2. But what if a factor appears more than once in the denominator? Well, let's take a look at this example. When we factor, in our first expression, the factors are x minus 2 and x minus 10. The second expression I want you to pay particular attention to. We need to factor -1 anytime our leading variable is negative. And in this case, our leading variable is x. So we're going to factor -1 out of the denominator of the second expression. And that gives us two factors, -1 and x minus 2. And finally, in the third expression, we have x minus 1, 5, which factors to be x minus 5 by itself. Now, we're going to look at the maximum number of times each factor was used in each factorization. Now, in the first expression, x minus 2 and x minus 5 were each used once. In the second denominator, -1 and x minus 2 were used once each. But in the third denominator, x minus 5 was used twice. Now remember that we're always going to use the factors that appear the maximum number of times. So, in that case, -1 appears once. X minus 2 appears once in each. But x minus 5 appears twice in the third. So we're going to pick the factor with the highest exponent when we have the same factor but different exponents. One more example of that. Let's look at this. Now this is pretty easy to factor. I'm just going to write everything out in expanded form, and then I'm going to see how many times each factor was used in each denominator. So in this case, A was used twice, B was used 3 times, and C was used once in this first expression here. For the next expression, 3 was used once, and C was only used once. And finally, when I look at the third expression, I have A times A. A is used 2 times, B is used once, and C is used a whopping 5 times. So already, I know that my LCD is going to include C to the 5th power, because that's the maximum number of times it was used in one of my factorizations. So let's see what that looks like. Now, A was used a max of 2 times. My LCD is going to have A squared. B was used a max of 3 times in the first factorization. So I know I'm going to have B to the 3rd. I'm always going to pick the factor with the highest exponent when I have the same variable. And finally, C to the 5th, because that's the highest exponent among the variable C. Now that's the end of this video on how to find the least common denominator. If you're still having trouble with this, be sure you come to tutoring. Thanks, and peace out.